Good morning and welcome to After Post Photography. This conference already started yesterday. We decided to welcome you once again today and thank you all for coming. Our conference runs for the 6th time this year and we do regret that we had to put it on an online mode this time, but we like the fact that being online makes us accessible to speakers and audiences that would otherwise have little chance to attend. Also, we get to see their homes and their pets this way. The conference runs at the Faculty of Art History at the European University at St. Petersburg, and we welcome you on behalf of the faculty as well. Дорогие друзья, добро пожаловать на факультет истории искусств Европейского университета в Санкт-Петербурге и на конференцию после постфотографии. В этом году наша конференция проходит в 6-й раз, это впервые онлайн. Нам очень жаль, что мы не видим друг друга вживую, но с другой стороны режим онлайн делает конференцию доступной для многих спикеров и слушателей, которые иначе не могли бы к нам присоединиться. Мы заодно можем увидеть их дома и кошек и собак. У нас такое даже вчера было. I'd like to introduce the conference organizing committee. Я хотела бы представить вам оргкомитет конференции. Это Фридрих Тетьен. Он здесь. Ты здесь уже? Дарья Панайотти. Ольга Давыдова, Дженнифер Такер и Наталья Мазур сейчас пока с нами не здесь. И меня зовут Мария Гурьева, and myself, Мария Гурьева. And now I hand the floor over to Friedrich Tетьен, who will say a couple words himself, and he will be chairing the first panel. И я передаю слово Фридриху Тетьену, который скажет пару слов и будет модерировать первую секцию.
Okay, welcome everybody, and I'm afraid that I can't do what Maria does, being bilingual and repeating and saying in Russian also what I can say only in English. I also welcome you, and I only regret that I can't be in St. Petersburg with all of you and have a tea in the break, but I would just lay down some ground rules, so to say. The first is that the conference is bilingual, as you will have noticed. Maria already said that. Switch to the interpretation, to the interpretation button if you need to have a Russian lecture translated into English or an English lecture translated into Russian. We will disable all microphones except those of us who are speakers. If you would like to comment on the paper, please raise your hand, which you can do via the, I think via the reactions button, which is also at the bottom of the screen. And also check every once in a while the chat, because somebody might would like to get in touch with you. The chat is also, the button for the chat is also at the bottom of the screen. We will also monitor that, so if you have a question to ask, you can also indicate it there, and so we will get back to you via the chat. I will be gently prodding the speakers if they tend to speak longer than 20 minutes, because we are on a tight schedule, and yeah, we have to do that. Unfortunately, it doesn't really make sense to use this one, which is how to say, an artifact from earlier conferences. Maria drew it some years ago, and it was also something she was waving to the speakers when they would be speaking too long. And I would like to introduce our next speakers, which are Vera Chiket and Peter Fornaro, both from the Digital Humanities Lab at the University of Basel. Vera is an art historian and a sociologist, and she taught and did research in Basel, Hamburg, and Bologna, and she wrote her PhD project on fake photos, which is something which I would also like to put on my reading list within the framework of the Iconos Center in Basel. And her research focuses on mass media photography and digitization, and she's currently working on a project participatory knowledge practices in the analog and digital archives, and as a research associate in the Digital Humanities Lab at the University of Basel. While Peter is a founding member of the Digital Humanities Lab, the former Image and Media Lab at the University of Basel, and Deputy Director of the Data and Service Center for the Humanities. He's a trained photographer and engineer who completed his habilitation in digital humanities, and he teaches photography and image sciences at the Universities of Basel, Lugano, and Zurich. And they are going to talk about, or the talk has the title of Uncover the Past in Historical Photographs with Future Techniques, and I give over the floor to the both of you.
Thanks a lot. I hope you see my shared screen and you can hear the audio. Thanks a lot for being able to have this presentation in this conference. It unfortunately was not possible to come to St. Petersburg, but it's very nice to be with you here and to have the possibility to do the presentation. I first would like to start with some information about our group, because we were actually a group which was originally called Scientific Photography Lab, which was founded in 1924 at the University of Basel. Why? Because we have a lot of chemical industry there, and Ziba, you maybe know Ziba Chrome, for example, was one of the companies which really developed quite a number of new products, and therefore research was important. And but somehow in the late 80s, it was clear that research was not something which belonged anymore really in the physical and chemical environment of a university. And we started to become more and more digital. And one interesting project we started was the problem of fading colors of old color slide material. You see here an example on the left, which is very magenta colored. And there is actually no way to do this chemically to reconstruct the real colors. And if you are in the digital domain, there is a big risk that you recreate colors which you like from today's perspective and which are not real. And so one of the first experiments where we saw the potential of digital technologies was that we did fast aging experiments with such slide materials and monitored the decay of the colorants to actually reconstruct the real colors. And here you see an example of that, where the colors were regained on the right. And somehow this contact to different memory institutions which digitized material led us to a completely new perspective. We learned that the creation of material is something which is, of course, important to be able to do something in the digital domain. But then the memory institutions had the new problem of archiving. They created new digital originals which were never meant and will not be meant to replace the originals, but they need to be preserved because it needs quite some effort to preserve them. And you see here an example of one of our early computer history rooms, which we took care of to actually be able to read old data carriers. And so the reason why we changed to the name Digital Humanities Lab was because we really changed the faculty. We moved from the natural sciences, from the chemical physical department to the humanities, in the heart of the humanities, and we tried there to really be a transdisciplinary institutional group which focuses on those three aspects: the creation, the archiving, and the usability of digital content. Very interesting for me is that there are quite a number of words and definitions which show me how difficult the dialogue between technology and humanities is. One example I would like to give here, I mean, if we look very closely at analog film, at black and white material, we see there that we have grain, black, silver grain, metallic grain, which is either existing or not. it's an extremely binary behavior. So an analog film is absolutely a digital data carrier, if you want so, or information carrier, whereas an electronic chip creates an analog signal, a voltage, which is completely proportional to the incoming light. So it's fully analog. So we did a transition from natural sciences or from the analog world to the digital world, which meant we somehow moved from the digital image to an analog image, which I think it's very fascinating. And so I would like to first hand over to Vera to present a project which is called Review, and she will speak about that now. Vera, you are still muted.
Thank you. So our title sounds somehow a bit pathetic, and then yet you could mark that mostly everything we do to save knowledge for later generations, we do with techniques that somehow relates to the future. So it has become a well-known fact that the older generation also likes to use contemporary media, not as in humorous sketches in which the old generation uses tablets as cutting boards. This one on the left is from OP and iPad, and he really uses the iPad to cut, and then he puts it in the washing machine. And this is actually not really as what we experienced in our workshops. We saw that it can be a very useful medium to bring together different generations around a table, around a tablet, or just to put them into contact with each other via digital means. And that was also one of the main goals of this exhibition that is called Revive as EU, actually. And maybe you can already switch to the next slide. And that's why we brought in this past project together the representatives of the grandparent generation and the grandchild with their family photos. And this exhibition was co-created with citizens from Basel, including students and seniors who offered their photographs in a guided discussion about the evolution of family portrait, and thus connecting people who are old enough to bring analog experience from analog photography and younger people who have grown up with digital photography. And the goal of the effort was to draw attention to the attention of the newer generation of imaging to the importance of family photography as a means of documenting our society and our lives. So in a workshop, you can show the next slide, please. We focused on image description, indexing work, and the generation of metadata for the images. So we discussed the phenomenon of hashtags, which has apparent similarities with describing metadata or keywords, but however, in the end, it lacks usability for research approaches. Family photography is an important research topic because even though many family photos are very similar and the occasions such as birthdays or weddings can be recognized, the attribution is much easier and faster and more correct for contemporaries. It was also interesting to observe that the description of photo groups, the comparison and linking and extended viewing, as well as the discussion of several group photographs represented a high added value, because sometimes if you have like portraits from a special specific event, only the ones that have been there can really put them into an image cluster and say that this belongs together. So here it became very clear how important these informations from the people that really lived in this time is. And this metadata needs to be acquired as well before also this diminishing group of experts are lost. And as Peter already mentioned, the chemical degradation of the material happens, but we think this is not only this is only one thing that we have to save, but we need to also to archive other aspects in order to keep the cultural heritage alive and really facilitate storage and retrieval and also usability of all these digitized images. Because without the narrative of the people who still know certain, this is work in progress. This slide, I have to say, I have to improve it. But without the narrative of the people who still know certain photographed people or remember certain rooms or things that were common at the time, these images are lost in the digital as well. Even if we keep the image alive endlessly and migrate them from one format to the next, the relevance and connection to the reality of society and knowledge base is not guaranteed at all. And so to save not only the visual representation of these analog pictures that will lose its carrier medium eventually, we also need to save the metadata about these images. And this is what we focus on the next project. I will now try to explain a bit this graphic. So we have on top the analog photographs and the time is running out also with the older generation, as you can see. And then we can digitize the images. We get also some technical metadata, which can be very useful, but we realize that this is not enough, and it's not, so the images lost their relevance and their connectivity to the discourse. So one aspect is that we also want to digitize the older people via machine learning experiments, so that we kind of use machine learning to gather the semantic metadata and add this metadata to the digitized images. And we also want to make a graphic user interface or a web platform where the older and the younger generation can really participate together to enrich informations on these digital images. So because we think that we can, with this experiment, enhance the exchange with the younger generation and the remote public to encounter with the persons via these options, because like this, the knowledge can spread and be added to the images for the broader public, and not just, I mean, you all have like grandparents and hearing every day the same stories and get bored by these stories, but there are a lot of other people, or like the collective heritage memory, that would be very interested in these histories. And that's what we try to do with our future project. And now I hand over again to Peter, who will say something on metadata, and then on this project, Pia.
Yes, thank you, Vera. Yes, maybe this is also this bow back to the beginning of the presentation. We just experienced that due to different reasons, as digital reconstruction or for the possibility of dissemination, a lot of collections and memory institutions digitized their content. And we are operating a digitization center at the University of Basel, where we support such institutions. And we just see that digitization is going extremely fast. You can scan 1,000 photographs per day easily, but cataloging and indexing is extremely time consuming, but essential. And I would like to come quickly to the importance of metadata. And as Vera mentioned also, I would like to address the importance of contextualized metadata. First, just something which is highly interesting. We often digitize, and this is not since the beginning like this, but in the last years, the awareness of meta information also on the originals became more and more important. And you see here some handwritings on the back of a photograph. And there is certainly one problem. I mean, there is important information, but if we scan it, it's not information we can search for. We need optical character recognition to really transfer this information, to bring it in a database where we can search and find such content. And this works well, but we see that the complexity of this meta information on placed on photographs is quite complex, and it's not easy to structure it, and that's one thing which we try to do. Another thing which is quite interesting is that a lot of context information is for certain images like standard. It's like obvious. It's like an iconic image. We know, even though we do not exactly know, or you can show this image to someone who is new to a certain context. You know this image is from Paris, you know this is the Eiffel Tower. If you are doing a little bit more research, you can guess that it is probably in 1889, because then they constructed the image. But if you take other images, it becomes much more complicated to get this information. For example, if we look at an image like this, to be able to search and find for images, we need to have metadata about this image. And here, if we look at standard image content retrieval procedures, we can have objects recognized like man, woman, a landscape, probably there is an umbrella. We can even try stuff like face recognition. But if we do this, we are always like focused on this image. And this is something we try to go further in this PR project with this participatorial image archive project, which just started this spring. And what we try there is really to do two things. We are in two directions highly interdisciplinary. We work very closely with people from computer sciences. They have algorithms and tools to do image processing, to recognize content. You see here a very nice example how well this works. We have man, women, an airplane with a certain quality, but the problem is there. We see that all those technological features in computer sciences are done with modern image content. If you try to do something with this, the algorithms fail. I mean, the image on the right side is even very complicated to explain if you know something about the image, and an algorithm would say people on a tree is not a valid result and would probably give an error. Or on the left side, I mean, this typical stage photography was very common in early years, and also there an algorithm can recreate failure information, which then is in the big mass of images of a collection really a problem, because it can lead to images which are on one hand highly interesting, but on the other side you cannot find them anymore because you don't have the valid meta information. Or here, we need the know-how of people which know exactly what those round things are, because an algorithm might think it's a drum, but it's certainly not a drum. It's a tool to do hand stitching of different motifs. And things like this, proper training sets are extremely important to have really valid tools to really help us in cataloging and indexing larger photographic collections. Another thing which we think is highly interesting is the quality of albums. We have a large collection in this project of historical photographic albums, and we are sure that there is a pattern in those albums which can be recognized by the help of artificial intelligence. We try to train machine learning algorithms with different correlated images in albums to try to find somehow even invisible aspects we should closer look at. And on the left side, we have photographs which might be for certain people very, very highly correlated, but we need to know why. And also the same for another group which we tested on the right side. And to do this, we need to open our archives. We have also learned that to work only with experts, it's a little bit dangerous because it can be too biased. And therefore, this aspect of participation of a larger crowd is something we are working with a design group, which is focusing mainly on the visual appearance of such photographs and tools to structure them. Here you see very early drafts of an aspect of how to structure images potentially on a map of the planet to somehow be able to trace routes of travels in the information and store it as meta information. Other things we are trying to do is trying to find those red lines between images and trying to add the semantic information which is between the images. I think that's a very interesting point.
I hate to interrupt, but we are very short on time now.
Good. Yeah, it was the last slide.
Okay.
So, but this information about also these patterns between the images is something we are highly interested in, and we just see there that it is very important to work together with historians and photo historians to make the technological oriented people aware of the difference of historical and modern image material. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you very, very much, Peter and Vera. The lecture for me was a candy shop, I must say, and I already sent you 2 links in the chat because I really would love to chat with you about certain projects that I'm also conducting in the moment, dealing with private photography. But I'm more than happy to accept questions. If you just brief questions, we have about 5 minutes time to talk. If there are, I can't see any in the moment. No raised hands. No. Which is
Winfried Gerling has a question.
Okay, Winfried,
yeah.
Please. Somebody needs to unmute him.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I have a few more questions, but I ask only 2. One is, do you train training sets for AI learning? So do you generate new training sets for the people who are the people who read or train the software or the AI? And the other is, do you use like standard metadata like IPTC or EXIF, or do you generate another metadata system?
Maybe I first can comment, and Vera, you can add more information. First, we are closely working together with the Swiss archive of folklore photographs, and they have 3 selected, very different but selected collections. One is very much focused on albums, and there, yes, we see the importance to have a very well chosen reference set we are working with. So to have really the possibility to compare also the results between different peer groups. And we are also, I would say we are rather, we are optimistic that there are certain results coming out of machine learning, which then led us to discuss why do we get this or that result. But I think it's really, I like the, this description of computer-aided cataloging. I don't believe that there will be results which are which need not very much reflection on how they were generated and what do they say. And so therefore, yes, reference sets are extremely important. And the other thing about metadata, there is a strong trend towards more contextualized and semantic metadata, like SciDoc CRM is one, linked art is another. And technological metadata like EXIF and IPTC, or basic metadata like Dublin Core are showing us that there are other aspects we should not keep out of focus, especially all the technological things. EXIF, which mainly focuses on capturing processes. We need metadata also about the processes, what happen in AI. We need to be able to evaluate the results which come out there, and therefore I believe a completely new quality of technological metadata will be necessary, which is not existing so far.
Thank you. If I overlook anybody asking questions now, because otherwise I would just take the opportunity once more to thank you, and I'm really looking forward to talk to the two of you. For Maria also already smiles because she knows why I want to talk to you. And I would otherwise I would just say thank you again, applaud you, and
Thank you.
Go to the next lecture, if I may, which is by Елена Голуб from the Ural State University, and she's a visual culture researcher and a philosopher, and she holds an MA of film criticism theory at the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Sciences in St. Petersburg, and she's going to talk, well, something like the metadata of analog photography, or the chemical metadata of analog and digital photography, like silver salt and pixels, exploring the material boundary of and now something happened with my screen. The material boundary of a photographic image. Elena, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hello everyone. So I'm very glad to see you here, and my lecture will be in Russian, so I ask you to enable translation if you need one. So can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see your presentation and we can see
Good.
you.
Окей, тогда я просто начну. И я начну с цитаты Вильяма Флюссера. I'm starting with the quotation of William Flusser, which should work as a setup for us. Современная наука наводит на мысль о том, что объект есть не нечто устойчивое, а излучина скрещивающихся полей взаимоотношений. Это цитата из его эссе о проецировании. Я бы хотела начать с истории, ну и на самом деле продолжить историю одного снимка, спектр значений и способ интерпретации которого существенно изменялись на протяжении половины столетия. Данный снимок сделан американскими летчиками в 1944 году в Польше во время стратегической операции по обнаружению нефтехимического завода Мановицбуна, одного из предприятий конгломерата Фарбен, который являлся крупнейшим поставщиком химической продукции в Третьем Рейхе. И производственные цеха завода занимает основную часть изображения. Далее, в 1977 году, то есть через 33 года после того, как был сделан данный снимок, фокус внимания сместился. Никто более не смотрел на центральные сооружения, и аналитики аэрофотоснимков из ЦРУ обнаружили, что на фотографии в области параллакса объектива запечатлено здание Крематория 2, концентрационного лагеря Аушвиц. И Харун Фароки, немецкий режиссер, включает данное изображение в свой фильм «Картины мира и подписи войны», который был снят в 1989 году, и связывает внезапную новоявленность объектов в кадре с изменением идеологической конструкции нашей оптики. Способ видеть напрямую связан с идеологическим контекстом, согласно Джону Дорджеру. И реальность таким образом зависит от того, какое значение мы готовы приписать ей через репрезентацию. А Фароки в фильме как раз показывает связь изображения с контекстом производства прежде всего. Также наличие зерна на пленке создает спорные и неразрешимые ситуации, в которых мы не можем с точностью подтвердить наличие объекта в реальности. И я попрошу Марию показать отрывок из фильма, который я ей отправила.
In Central Europe, the sky is cloudy most of the time. Clear skies on about 30 days in the year. On the 4th of April 1944, the sky was cloudless. Preceding rain showers had precipitated the dust in the air. American aircraft had taken off in Foggia, Italy, and flown towards targets in Silesia, factories for synthetic petrol and rubber, known as Buna. On the flight over the IG Farben Company factory, still under construction, a pilot clicked his camera shutter and took photographs of the Auschwitz concentration camp. First picture of Auschwitz, taken at 7,000 meters altitude. The pictures taken in April 1944 in Silesia arrived for evaluation at Medmenham, England. The analysts discovered a power station, a carbide factory, a factory under construction for Buna, and another for petrol hydrogenation. They were not under orders to look for the Auschwitz camp, and thus they did not find it. How close the one is to the other, the industry, the camp. It was not until 1977 that 2 employees of the CIA went through the archives to find and evaluate the photographs of Auschwitz. It was not until 33 years later that the following words were inscribed: Tower and Commandant's House and Registration Building and Headquarters and Administration and Fence and Execution Wall and Block 11, and the word gas chamber was inscribed.
Мария, вы можете остановить, да? Thank you. So I'm back to my presentation. И двинемся дальше. В 1996 году и по 2000 год в радикально иной перспективе это изображение вновь будет использовано. К снимку во время своей защиты в суде обращается отрицатель Холокоста Дэвид Ирвинг. Ирвинг подал иск с обвинением в клевете и нанесении ущерба своей научной и деловой репутации в отношении историка Деборы Липштедт, которая написала текст, посвященный разоблачению аргументации отрицателей Холокоста. Перед ответчицей стояла очень непростая задача, потому что судебная процедура должна была соответствовать юридическим нормам и требовала полного доказательства того, что Холокост являлся реальным историческим событием. На одной из сессий процесса в качестве доказательства со стороны Ирвинга, я прошу обратить внимание именно на это обстоятельство, был предложен тот самый аэрофотоснимок, который в 1944 году был сделан союзниками. Один из самых важных доказательных звеньев в сложной цепочке, в сложной и запутанной цепочке аргументации Ирвинга было указание на факт подделки снимка. Ирвинг утверждал, что то, что принято считать дырами от труб газовых камер, не имеет фотографической природы. С учетом масштабирования они выглядят слишком большими. Дыры, по мнению Ирвинга, могли быть нанесены с помощью кисти и красок на негатив. И на момент суда состояние крыши крематория не позволяло провести экспертизу на наличие отверстия труб, через которые в газовые камеры как раз и поступал газ циклон B. Аргумент Ирвинга предполагал, что без дыр газ не мог попасть в помещение, а значит, оно не могло функционировать как газовая камера. Если сооружение не было газовой камерой, тогда Аушвиц не мог быть лагерем смерти. И отсутствие Аушвица как ключевого центра процесса истребления подразумевает, что Холокоста в устоявшемся смысле не существовало. Историю суда Дэвида Ирвинга в одном из своих эссе «Насилие на пороге обнаружимости», «Violence at the threshold of detectability», рассматривает Ял Вейцман, основатель объединения Forensic Architecture. Я на всякий случай поясню, что Forensic Architecture — это исследовательская группа, которая использует архитектурные методы моделирования и технологии для расследования случаев государственного насилия и нарушений прав человека. И Вейцман отсылает нас к судебному докладу Невина Брайанта, аналитика аэрофотоснимков и спутниковых изображений из НАСА. Брайант с помощью современной как раз цифровой оптики анализировал молекулярный состав пленки, которая использовалась в ВВС США в 1944 году. Нечеткость точек и интерференция изображений, по его заключению, произошла на уровне зерен в эмульсии пленки. И подобное происходит, когда объекты с учетом расстояния их расположения от объектива камеры имеют размер или близки к размеру одной частицы соли серебра в пленке. Он провел экспертизу большей части кадров из этой же катушки пленки и обнаружил несколько случаев подобного искажения. На других снимках, судя по всему, были запечатлены марширующие на территории лагеря заключенные, которые, по мнению Ирвинга, также являлись результатом работы кисти художника. Итак, Брайант заключил, интерференция возникает, когда размер головы человека совпадает с размером зерна в эмульсии пленки. И в результате этого возникает муаровый эффект. Что такое муаровый эффект, вы можете видеть на слайде. Размер отверстия труб примерно совпадает с головой человеческого черепа. И, основываясь на данной истории, Вейцман вводит понятие порог обнаружимости, threshold of detectability, вводит понятие порог обнаружимости, которое обозначает ситуацию слияния фотографируемого объекта с исходными возможностями записи негатива на изображение. В этом состоянии материальность представляемого объекта, в данном случае отверстие труб, и материальность поверхности, представляющей его, в данном случае поверхность зерен соли серебра, следует рассматривать как наличие и репрезентацию, presence and representation. Иными словами, отверстия труб являются фотографируемыми объектами, но в то же время они регистрируют и делают видимый состав пленочной эмульсии. а фотоповерхность предстает в виде изображений и материальной реальности одновременно. И здесь я снова отсылаю к тексту Вильяма Фюссера о проецировании. Он пишет следующее. Фотография зерниста, молекулы соли и серебра, и ставит проблему рассеивания. Чем меньше зерна, тем плотнее рассеивание, тем больше подобия с вещью, достигая степени рассеивания, которая соответствует изготовлению вещи. И фотография — лишь первый шаг в направлении синтетического изготовления вещей из частиц. Вейцман создает аналитический механизм, который позволяет специалистам из группы Forensic Architecture проводить независимую экспертизу некоторых случаев изображений, некоторых случаев скрываемого насилия, анализируя изображения. И шире этот механизм позволяет видеть материальность фотографического образа. Насколько, это может быть закономерный вопрос, насколько полезным может быть данный механизм распознавания материальности в эпоху цифровых изображений. Для цифровых изображений также существует целый ряд конвенций, одной из которых является конвенция в отношении пикселя. Большая степень детализации машинных и спутниковых изображений и улучшение их разрешения невозможно, поскольку изображение должно сохранять конфиденциальность. Сейчас покажу слайд. Поэтому здесь может возникнуть та же самая ситуация, что и в случае с пленочным снимком. Размер пикселя с учетом расстояния объекта съемки от аппарата соответствует размерам человеческой головы. И как раз в одном из своих расследований группа Forensic Architecture анализирует спутниковые фотографии атак с использованием беспилотников в Пакистане в 2012 году. И в лучшем случае след от проникновения снарядов отображается на спутниковых изображениях в виде потемнения пикселя на несколько тонов. Материальность цифрового изображения также имеет порог видимости. Она делает невидимой целую войну. И на теоретическом уровне разоблачение бесспорности индексальной природы фотографии обсуждается очень активно, долго и продуктивно, и критическое измерение этой проблемы также получает в работах современных художников и фотографов. Но в повседневных и особенно институциональных практиках, как мы, например, могли видеть на радикальном примере судебного разбирательства, документальная фотография сохраняет эту ауру чистого обозначения. С одной стороны, меня разочаровывает наивность, но не меньше, чем часто встречающаяся релятивистская позиция в отношении к реальности. И модель, о которой я рассказываю сегодня, она не указывает на несостоятельность фотоизображения как свидетельство. Она скорее указывает на его несостоятельность как абсолютного свидетельства, так как сообщает о наличии нескольких уровней отношения изображения с реальностью. Также я думаю, что внимание к материальной границе образа в таком узком значении, о котором я говорю сейчас в своем докладе, оно полезно не только в досудебной и судебной экспертизах, но также способно активировать именно теоретический потенциал, и описанный механизм может выступать в качестве комплементарного инструмента к различным аналитикам изображений как феномена. And that's all I have.
Okay. That we are at the end of the lecture.
Yeah, that's the end
Okay.
of the lecture.
I'm sorry that I didn't react. I would like to thank you very much, and I just skipped the end of the lecture because, or not skipped, I missed it because I was writing down some notes because as usual I have some questions. But first of all, I would like to thank you, and I would also like to open the floor for everybody to comment on the paper or to ask questions have questions of understanding. Please indicate, raise your hand, or write something in the chat, because otherwise I will just, how to say, I will just take over the opportunity and ask all the questions I have, which apparently I can do. This is lovely. Yeah, I like, actually it's something I've been not really thinking about, but what came to my mind was always the early ideas or the early discourses of photography, where they would say that this is so amazing that photography could depict everything, and even those things that people could not see. And so I think, which is where basically the whole idea of something like indexicality came from, that there in the sense of Peirce, where he says there is this point-to-point reference of the object, of the visual world to the photographic image. And it always, well, since I understood a little bit more about photography than just looking at images, it always puzzled me because I thought exactly the same, something what you pointed out, that there are kind of limits to indexicality, that there is not, that it is not something, that there is not an infinite absolute evidence that photography gives us, but that it is something, yeah, that has limits, like everything, like telescopes or microscopes, where you just can go so far, but you will never see, I don't know, the core of an atom in all its beauty. And what I was wondering up to a certain degree is how to handle that, because I think the court proceedings you referred to were an example for that, because up to a certain degree, I think the judges must just simply have said, well, we can't tell that for sure, but David Irving, you are an idiot. And I think they were quite right with that. But still, I meet in particular in other fields where it is, I don't know, about climate change, for instance, where people say without absolute evidence, we don't believe it. And so what do we do with this kind of, how to say, problem? What do we do when we don't, when photography, which is supposed to be a medium that we understand as depicting reality in whatever kind of sense we give to reality, if that doesn't work, if our idea about reality and depicting it are wrong?
Да, идея заключается в том, что при анализе фотоизображений, в тех случаях, когда изображение по каким-то причинам выступает как доказательство чего-то, мы анализируем одновременно два измерения фотографии. С одной стороны, изображаемое на ней что-то, объект. С другой стороны, материальность изображения, либо конвенцию этого изображения, как, например, мы можем видеть по цифровым изображениям спутниковым. Также здесь использованы в основном спутниковые изображения, как раз потому, что они довольно часто являются свидетельствами в крупных процессах, в том числе в судебных разбирательствах. Вот. И я думаю, что хранить фотографию как свидетельство это слишком радикальный шаг. Вот. Скорее следует рассматривать ее именно вот в этих двух режимах одновременно, имея в виду оба из них.
And we also have question from Elena. I will read this. I will translate it into English. So she's asking you to clarify the interrelationship between the referential function of photography, or referential or documentary function of photography, and its material characteristics. What are the interrelationships between the two?
Спасибо за вопрос. Я могу снова включить презентацию, чтобы было немного понятнее. Секунду.
Конечно.
Да. Я думаю, что ответ как раз тоже содержится в этом. То есть вот этот снимок, да, который я анализировала, он дает возможность сказать, дает возможность оценить документальный потенциал фотографии. Вот здесь, с одной стороны, у нас есть материальность самого объекта, это как бы дыры от труб, да, в крыше. С другой стороны, у нас есть материальность, представляющий этот объект поверхности, это соли серебра. И вот это понятие порога обнаружимости, которое вводит Тетьен, на котором я здесь пользуюсь, это как раз такая нулевая точка, в которой как будто бы невозможно доказательство наличия объекта, потому что все, что мы видим, это пределы поверхности соли серебра. И отношение материальности и документальности, да, как это было обозначено в вопросе, скорее такое, что материальность, она составляет часть вот этого доказательного процесса, то есть она не может быть извлечена из аналитики изображения, если оно должно свидетельствовать. Вот я бы так ответила. Если есть еще какие-то уточняющие вопросы, то я могу дать уточняющие ответы.
Friedrich,
Да,
you're muted.
Sorry, I'm inviting more questions. In which I can't see in the moment.
There is a question from Елена Vivich.
Okay. Okay, there's a question in the chat by Elena, if I'm not mistaken, or is it?
That's the one that we...
All right, okay. So then I would suggest that we may also already step into a more general discussion of all the 3 lectures we had in the morning. And so I would also invite all the 4 speakers of today to be kind of present on the podium, on the virtual, on the digital podium, so to say. And what struck me actually in this panel up to a certain degree was that I think all 3 lectures kind of revolved or had a certain proximity to something like the question of metadata from 3 very, very different perspectives. And that is the one is what I kind of understood from Ruth's lecture, or what made me think from Ruth's lecture is, in a way, photography producing kind of historical metadata, if you like, of the images being architecture's metadata, if you like. What I found interesting in or what really will, I'm sure, yeah, as I said, I really would love to discuss it in more detail about the lecture of Peter and Vera, was that how we can kind of, at the one hand, generate and make metadata readable of and into images as well, and how to use them to, how to say, gain information from images that at first view might not even be in there, which comes from something like comparison and contextualization with other images in particular, and which also comes from understanding the images as objects as well, as material objects. And what I understand from Lena's lecture, what I found so interesting is that I would say that those images from the camp, they would not be readable at all if we hadn't the memories of survivors who could point out what actually was a certain bigger building, because most of the building were razed after the Germans left, and so there was not much of trace. We could read, to put it the other way, those images could be read only because we have also outside knowledge or knowledge outside the images, which of people who were there and who could describe what we could see on those images. So, but how to put it? What made it so interesting to me is to think more about the outside of the images, so to say. And the outside of the images is, on the one hand, the metadata, and on the other hand is the relations between the images and the relations between the images and the time they were taken in. And anyway, it doesn't really resolve into a question, but it resolves into some kind of thing that made me think in the end. So you may just interrupt me and add something to what I probably will have lost in the course of the lecture or in the course of my trying to put it into a question, because I can only describe what I learned from those 3 lectures, but not much what I can. I need a little bit more time to make it into a question, so to say.
No, I really like what you just mentioned, so that I mean the unseen or the outside of the image becomes very, very important, but it says not that the image gets less important. So I mean the thing outside the image needs the image to get the relevance or to get into this network and become relevant as well. So I really like your thought, but I don't, yeah, I cannot comment further, but I really like what you mentioned, and I really think that this binds together also the 3 presentations we had. So I really like to follow on this thought.
Yeah, maybe a question, or to put it into a question, could be how do we as we all work with images on one level or the other, what kind of methods do we need to develop to work with those metadata, to work with the outside of the images, to work when I started doing history of photography, or being aware of it, that there is such a thing, or when I started to think about photographs, the main discourse was what was visible in the photograph, what the photograph made visible. And I think that is still one of the key ingredients of a photograph, to put it like that. What is actually made visible by a photograph? But it seems, after those 3 lectures in particular, that this outside of the photographs is something that might need to be made visible as well, or at least perceivable as well. And I wonder what kind of strategies come to your mind to maybe start working with that, if there's anything. Ruth raises her hand.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit what was mentioned also in the very initial call of your conference, the relation to time. Because if I talk of my own projects or my own example with these photographs of these office buildings, they are connected to a very specific moment of time. And that, of course, changes over time. And I think the issue is that we go back and look at them and think of these images as stable representations of these spaces, which they are not. And I think this connection or the aspect of time, that was also something when the second contribution talked about the color, for example, of these images, that then, you know, if we recreate the colors of the historical images in digital world nowadays, we create them with the colors we think they should have today. So there's always this aspect of how we relate to the fact that time changes these moments that were caught by the initial photography, but also changes how we perceive of them.
Somebody will prod me if I overlook any. Peter, please, sorry, I overlooked that.
I think that's the thing you pointed out, I think, is exactly what we are trying to find out in experimental workshops. This preliminary project Vera spoke about, this RevEU project, with people with different age, which commented on photographs, showed very clearly how difficult it is to somehow let's say limit the potential way how they describe everything between the images. I mean, if you have something on the image, house, car, there are like specific words which you can say those are allowed in our vocabulary. But as soon as you start to go away from the images, that was our first experience there, it gets extremely colorful. They start to tell about their own truth. They start to talk about the family relations, travels, and stuff like this. And I think one big challenge is really to limit the potential way how they describe without biasing the results too much. That's really, really difficult, but I think we need to explore how far this is possible. But I absolutely agree. It is also important to visualize the things which are between the images. That's very, very, very important. And I could imagine that time is one aspect, that there are temporal relations between the single images to visualize them. And the other are those red lines, which we showed in the last slide. And the red line shows that two images belong together, but we need this annotation why. And there I think that's just something which we learned from the computer scientists, that they are very much interested in this as well, because they operate a lot, or they do a lot with machine learning, and they get results, but they cannot judge why this result was given by the computer system. And I think this is also for the computer science people extremely interesting to have this interdisciplinary dialogue with historians and photo historians.
Brian has a comment.
Brian? You would need to unmute them. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Sorry, this is for Ruth Baumeister. I tried to type this and send it to everyone, and I kept pressing, but it doesn't seem to have appeared in the chat.
No. I
don't know what the problem is. In any case, I had two remarks to comment on Ruth's talk. The first concerns Adolf Loos. Adolf Loos was notoriously suspicious of architectural photography. He had no confidence in its ability to actually convey real architectural value. And I think that that's one sort of very important starting point to think about these photographic documentations of public offices. The second concerns the production of the offices themselves. I think that many of the issues that Ruth raises have to be considered by remembering that buildings are produced as well as designed, and they're produced as much by the commissioners and the patrons as by the architects. Architects come into practice on designing office buildings especially rather downstream. Further upstream at the origins are the actual people who run the offices and who want them building. So for instance, the Bureau Landschaft idea of an office was really designed by business managers more than architects. And so you put these two things together, the fact that the practice of architectural photography is an unreliable guide very often to actual architectural quality and the issues required in understanding and improving design. And secondly, the fact that the designers ultimately of many kinds of public space are only in part the architects. It's the commissioners that you have to go to find out.
Can I quickly answer on that one?
Please, Ruth, go ahead.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's in the kind of realm and the thematic focus of this conference. I didn't elaborate on that, but actually our initial incentive, so to say, to start this research at all was that the partner I'm working with, he worked back then in an office where they were supposed to design a new office building, and they looked into research, and research on workplace and office buildings was not made by architects anymore, but was made by consultancies or by furniture firms or by IT consultancies. And they all had one incentive, which was selling their products. And that's why we get into these strange circles that offices need to be renewed, or for example, the main topic when it came to office design was only flex space or fixed space. And all of these consultancies, they promote the open office landscape. And that's also actually why we went back to the Büro Landschaft. And I don't know whether you realized it in our book. That also makes one part, because it was the first open office, or like maybe not the first open office, but in Western Germany after the wars, certainly one of the most important and iconic ones. And it got totally raped and changed to the irrecognizable. And none of these entities, none of these promoters of the open office nowadays look back to that example and try to learn from it.
That was something that you mean you refer to the picture on the cover on the beginning of your presentation.
No, it's another one. It's this kind of huge floor plan that looks like a huge open office with I don't know, almost hundreds of desks, and that was like Brian just said, was the result of office consultants who tried to design the floor plan according to how work is done in the office and how it's communicated in the office. And that completely got wiped off to these single office spaces again, or double office spaces.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was something I was also wondering when on the one hand, how those offices changed, how those offices were changed as working environment, because I only know some of those large space offices where everybody, and those semi-isolated spaces where everybody sits in a cubicle that is about chest high or something like that, where I always wondered why, what does it give me? But on the other hand, I could, how those changes are actually also changes in visibility and in, how to say, the optical framework in offices also all the time. and the other, because I was just wondering also about the way those images, the way those offices are photographed, actually, because when I looked at the cover illustration, or at the illustration with which you open which you opened the lecture, that there was the old photograph on the left, or the part of the old photograph on the left-hand side, on new photograph on the right-hand side, and the left-hand side was like, oh, this is so open, and the light comes from within, and you could see everything, and it's all about transparency. And all of a sudden, the right-hand office looked like that you won't see if somebody only switches on the light or something like that. And I wondered how much that has to do actually with the architecture, or how much that has to do with photography. Because or whether you could kind of, if the photographer would have asked the people in the building before, hey, could you please switch on the lights in your offices, would the difference between, the stark difference between those two images, would that have been maybe a little bit softer than?
Maybe a little bit, but I think in general, all of these offices that were built, let's say in the 1960s, they have this very, 50s and 60s, they have this very light expression when it comes to the construction, and there's a lot of glass and a lot of see-through and things like that. But then came the energy crisis, and facades that have been very transparent first had to be changed to glass facade that is able to have a better energy value. Or a lot of them, they had like very high spaces, and all of a sudden they put in new ceilings where they could run all kinds of machinery. So this kind of architecture also was significantly changed through these technical modifications.
Mm-hmm. Well, the floor, we still have some 3 to 5 minutes of discussion. If I'm more than happy to go on with asking. It's always the privilege of the chair to ask as many questions as he or she can. Because I was coming to I see your point about the energy crisis and the change in the facades, but and extending it also to the other 2 lectures. I was wondering whether, or how much the idea of visibility and transparency has maybe changed since the 70s. Well, because on the one hand, it was some kind of, how to say, Foucauldian, everybody can see everything, or not everybody can see everything, but there's some kind of Foucauldian transparency to architecture, but not only architecture, but also to photographs themselves, where photographs are meant to show everything. And there, you have this on the one hand. On the other hand, you have all those kind of strategies of making things invisible. There's, so to say, and they become this kind of struggle between making things visible and making things invisible seems to be much more prominent to me if I let things pass my mind, like that people start to put in tinted windows in their cars so nobody can see who's sitting inside, or that photographs are, it is much harder, for instance, to publish photographs, because in Germany there has been a lot of lawsuits in the recent times about, for instance, using private photographs for, I'm current, just today we had a discussion with another project I have on whether we can use certain photographs for as press photographs or not. And so this kind of how to say, who controls visibility and who controls kind of who gets access to the images, or who gets access to visibility, to put it like that, is something which I wonder whether there really has been some kind of shift over the let's say 20 or 30 years also probably owing to the introduction of something like social media and easier distribution of images in the digital age and stuff like that. That was it's just like another thought that came to my mind when you said about something about the facades. And Peter is just
it's a very interesting point. I'm a little bit worrying also about, because you mentioned this in the beginning, we are operating a national data center for research data, and photographs are the very an important aspect. And I just think somehow digitization promised for quite a number of years unlimited visibility, but actually the opposite is true. Images, everybody says we need fair repositories, open access and stuff like this, but it does just mean that you have somehow a door which you can open and go inside, but what you find inside there is just a huge number of unstructured images and maybe some metadata, and that's really a problem. And I think, and that's one point Vera is very much focusing on, it needs somehow a new kind of digital curation. I think we have a huge potential to guide people through those large seas of image data in a repository, but someone has to do it. You need to be taken by the hand and someone has to explain something about photographs. And I think the presentation of Ruth is it's a fantastic example to just show how much you can explain and tell about photographs and how they are correlated with each other, but someone has to do it. And that's I see there really a big problem. Also for me, digitization is the opposite of visibility right now.
Could I respond to this?
Yes, please.
I'm very intrigued by the way that Peter showed how metadata could, as it were, recognize and collate images of a certain kind. For instance, you could ask for a collection of images of people standing by doorways, let's say. And it seems to me that this is on the way to a kind of art historical algorithm, where you could say, bring me all the images that you can find of a volute in buildings all over Europe or something like that. And some kind of search engine could find all the similar items in this vast collection that you would otherwise take months to collate and collect. Or you could even apply it to movies, and you could say, well, I would like to find movie scenes of people standing on balconies. And then you have a kind of slide library, the old-fashioned slide library of views of various kinds of architectural samples. And you could have a digital version of this, which would have movies and God knows what. But I mean, it sounds like a kind of insane project.
Well, yeah, I remember the good old slide libraries when I was studying history of art in Hamburg, and it was one of my jobs to work there. And it was really literally tens of thousands of images, and to sorting them was really, because every single slide was its own how to say, archival card. Yeah. So anyway,
maybe I can just add here that the Mnemosyne Atlas, also in Hamburg, and I mean we followed some project that already done this with the Pathos formula to search for this, and yeah, I mean this is certainly something that we need to think of, but I don't think that it would like be an alternative to art historian practices. So I mean, it can never like do the same as the experts can, but I think we should really experiment with it and see where it could lead us or where it could be helpful for us.
Yeah, I like the analogy with the Mnemosyne project. Very interesting.
Yeah. All right, I'm very grateful for all of you. I hope I didn't overlook anybody who wants to contribute to the discussion.